The Adirondacks are popular. So popular, they're having to deal with the impact of that success, managing crowds on trails, trying to find enough housing, enough hotels. Two stories today connected to that popularity. We meet one person among many who are moving up to remote work here, and we meet the guy who helped make the Adirondacks such a draw in the first place. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Clarkson University, offering over 95 programs of study with campuses in the Hudson Valley, Central, and Northern New York. More at clarkson.edu.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Friday, the last day of May, the 31st. First up, a leader in Adirondack tourism is retiring today. Jim McKenna is the CEO of the Regional Office of Sustainable Tourism, known as ROOST. He spoke with Emily Russell about how he got started in the industry and the lessons he's learned over his 40-year career.
Everything about Lake Placid from about 1974 through 1980 was all about the Olympic Games. And at that time, legacy wasn't really a component of the Games. So all efforts and thinking were entirely on the Games. Come March 1st, 1980, it was really, what do we do now type of attitude around the greater Lake Placid area. And I went actually to the North Elba Town Board, I think it was in the fall of 81, and suggested they needed a dedicated office to work on meetings and conventions, and that now was the time to do it while the name and brand of Lake Placid was well known. So the town of North Elba at that time said, okay, here's $30,000. I want you to start that. We're going to call you our business solicitor, and we're going to ask the chamber to give you a staff person as help. And so that's really where it started, back in February of 1982.
What do you think are the best management tools for creating specifically sustainable tourism here in the Adirondacks?
Well, first of all, Lake Placid is driven by leisure travelers, not event travel. Although that's the big event, people see the numbers, but it's really a leisure travel economy with events around it. And, the onslaught of the short-term rental industry has certainly changed things. I think that what ROOST did is that we decided in 2018 that we needed a destination management plan. So how do we manage this to the benefit, number one, of the residents first, number two, visitors second? And since that time, ROOST has hired an economic development person to help diversify the economy and concentrate on housing and childcare and those other things. So we think there's a way that you can utilize tourism to put communities in the position they want to be. But you have to recognize that it's going to have to take a little help and assistance from organizations like ROOST or others that will have to recognize that you can't build an economy sustainably at the size and scale you want with one industry.
How do taxes and specifically occupancy taxes play into sustainable tourism?
Well, clearly it does. Number one, using occupancy taxes for tourism promotion takes it off the general residence tax or the tax base of the community or the county that it's located in. And number two, there's ways that, as I think that some people have recognized a few years ago, we petitioned the state to do an additional 2% occupancy tax in Essex County and to dedicate that back to communities for programmings. How does that work? One clear example, if you look at Fawn Ridge Housing Development here in Lake Placid, the land was given, number one, and they've gotten over just, I think, $500,000 in occupancy tax money to make that project work. So I think there's great examples out there to help small nonprofits that we've seen this program help, and also help some needed community development programs.
So when you look towards the future of the tourism industry in the Adirondacks, what are you hopeful about and what are you worried about?
Well, I'll start with worried first. Climate change is my biggest fear of the future, and for a number of reasons. Number one, winters will melt. We know that. It's already starting happening. We're seeing crazy chaos weather. I think that because of where we are physically located in the northeast U.S. and with all the open spaces the North Country has, from Lake Champlain to the Adirondacks to Thousand Islands to Tug Hill, we're going to be an area where people are going to start gravitating to. And I think that offers additional challenges as we move forward.
And then what are you hopeful or excited about?
What I'm excited about is, and I've seen evolution in this over the 40 years. I try to think about it. I've worked with so many different town, village, county governments and state governments over those 40 years that I see, and I've also, I've been on boards from the Adirondack Council to the Adirondack Economic Development Corporation. What I see is that there's a willingness with all organizations now to look at the bigger picture, I think, and to really understand how we have to be positioned to obtain everybody's goals long term. And I think the conversations and the cooperation, I think, amongst some different imposing camps within the Adirondacks, I see those uniting more in the future, because I think to maintain what we have here in the park, I think we must pull everybody together long term.
That was Jim McKenna speaking with our Adirondack reporter Emily Russell. McKenna is retiring today from the Regional Office of Sustainable Tourism after working in the industry for more than 40 years. The COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath sent a lot of people in cities to more open and rural places. And in part because of people like Jim McKenna, many were drawn to the Adirondacks. And the emergence of Zoom and other remote work features means they can stay here. Today, we hear from one of those remote workers. Anna Williams-Birkin has this North Country at Work story.
Devonna Marks is 35. Until recently, she and her family lived in Boston. Marks works for a lab analytics company called Thermo Fisher Scientific. A few years ago, she got the opportunity to take a remote position and work from anywhere.
So then the next conversation was, well, if we could live anywhere in the world, where would we want to live?
Marks is originally from Fulton, near the Finger Lakes, and grew up coming to the Adirondacks with her dad. She and her husband have 2 young boys, and they hunt, fish, and trap. So Marks says the Adirondacks felt like a natural choice. She started looking at properties and fell in love with the cabins at Chimney Mountain, a cabin rental business in Indian Lake. Her husband didn't think they could afford it, but Marks told him to just wait until they visited. It was paradise.
We made a trip as a family there. We actually stayed overnight in one of the cabins. The Betts, who used to own it for 40 years before us, they invited us over. We stayed. We had dinner with them. They're amazing people.
Marks and her family bought the property and moved to Indian Lake in 2023. They had a ribbon cutting and started renting out cabins. But Marks also had to get the place set up for working remotely. Chimney Cabins is pretty far out there, and when they first bought it, there was no cell service and no Wi-Fi set up. But that's kind of the one thing that remote workers like Marks need.
The first thing I did is call and say, hey, can you come down and see if we have Wi-Fi here? And it turns out we actually have fiber optic cable.
Mark says it's actually faster than most cities because hardly anyone's using it. She's continued to work full-time for Thermo Fisher Scientific while running the cabin rental.
I was a little bit nervous going remote that I would lose some of that high energy, high paced work environment, and working fully remote and having the business, fills that cup for me.
In Massachusetts, Marks was working long hours and commuting. It was a lot of time away from her family. She still travels a bit for work, but the rest of the time she gets to be a lot more present.
I really love it. I'm a personality type that I always have to have something going on. I wake up early, I spend time in the morning on the business, then I get on for work, and then at night I spend time in the business. And then on the weekends, it's all about running the cabins.
Marks does their admin and marketing. She calls her husband Tim their facilities and engineering department.
So anything that needs to be fixed or updated, or I need him to build a boat launch area, or I need him to build picnic tables or a woodshed.
One thing Marks likes about the Adirondacks is the emphasis on self-sufficiency.
When you're in a city, everything's automatic. So there's an app for everything. People drop things off. Here, it really is about self-reliance. If you need something, you think about building it first. If something breaks, you try to figure out how to fix it first.
Marks and her family have been living and working in the Adirondacks for about a year now.
The weight that gets lifted off of your shoulders when you drive into this environment and you're surrounded by trees and you're surrounded by mountains and you're surrounded by water is amazing, and it feels good every single day.
Mark says the move is the best decision they've ever made. For North Country Public Radio's North Country at Work project, I'm Anna Williams-Birkin in Indian Lake.
The story was recorded at a North Country at Work event in Indian Lake. Music today by Alan Dunham of South Glens Falls and Caitlin Scholl of Lake Placid. Have a great weekend. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.